Hello there. Hang on. There we are. Welcome back to Adobe Live on this fine Wednesday morning. I hope you had a fantastic day so far, and it's gonna be even better because we have an exciting stream for today. And of course, after my stream, we have one more coming up all about Japan. Right, but before we get started, I would like to draw your attention over to the Behance chat, because if you're not watching this on Behance, then you are missing out. So do come on over to behance.net/Adobe Live, or if you want to be cool, be.net/Adobe Live. Come on over, join us there, and say hi to everyone. I can already, as always, see some faces in there. One of them happens to be me, and the other one, let's see, who do we have here? Ah, yes, Sean. Hi, Tim and Chatters. Oliver says hello, or hello even. Doris says hello. Marsha and I have been quoting songs that contain the word hello, such as hello, is it me you're looking for? Or hello from the other side. And as always, come on over to Behance, and you can ask questions to me or to other members of the community. And the questions should hopefully be all about Photoshop, because that's what we're doing today. So let's have a quick look at my screen. There we are. Yes, yesterday we have been working on blurring things out. And, you know, I asked myself, Tim, what do we want to do today? Sometimes I talk to myself. And I said to myself, ooh, yes, why don't we work on sharpening things back up? Right, so that's what we're doing today. We're sharpening images. Well, I say that like I'm also sharpening videos. We don't do that today, no. We're just doing images, and yeah, that's what we're doing today. If you have any questions, come on over to Behance, as always. Put your questions in the chat. And if you're watching the replay and you don't have a Behance chat anymore, don't worry. We also have a Discord. There we are. You can post your questions in there. And Sean is asking, why is the sky blue? Well, Sean, that's due to Rayleigh scattering in the upper atmospheres. The shorter wavelengths can pass through, and the blue light, since it has a higher frequency, sorry, not wavelength. My bad. See, that's why I don't talk about that. Yeah, but since the blue light has a higher frequency, that's why it scatters more and gets reflected down. That's also why the sun is red at sunset. Cool. And with that, hopefully everything is clear now, and we should be good to go. Right, so put that away, and let's have a quick look at the schedule before we get started. You're watching the crash course right now on Wednesday, and after this we have one more stream to come, and of course on Thursday another set of them. Right, okay, now sharpening. I don't think we'll need that, so just tuck that away. Sure, save it, why not, because Annika's watching at some point. Sharpen. There we are. Yep, sure, definitely. All right. I have prepared, as always, some photos, and we shall have a quick look at them just so you know what you can expect for today. And there we are. Right, where do we start? First of all, I would like to have a quick look at some of the filters which are available to us, because just like blurring, it's a whole host of different filters. And there are some recommendations to keep in mind and some best practices we should definitely talk about. So let's start with any old random image. How about, oh yes, that's a nice one. Just drag that in there. So, what's sharpening in the first place? Maybe you don't know what that is. Well, sharpening is really, it enhances detail in an image where otherwise perhaps the image would look a bit muddy, a bit blurry. But don't confuse this with detail recovery, because if in the original image there is no detail, let's say you have a really blurry shot, you won't be able to recover like in the CSI series, yes, enhance. Yeah, that's not happening. So we can only enhance the detail that's already there and just make it look more sharp and crisp. We can't actually magically bring in detail that wasn't there in the first place. All right, and which filters are available to us? Well, we can find them, as always, in the filter menu. Just going to zoom in. There we are. And in the so aptly named Sharpen category. There we are. Okay, just there we go. We have the Sharpen, which is very similar to the Blur filter, as in this doesn't have any settings. You can certainly apply it. I don't know about you, this image doesn't look really any different. The reason why it doesn't look any different, and if you just can see it, I was toggling back and forth, is that Sharpen is a fully automatic filter, which means it will just apply one setting fully automatically, and yeah, you can't really do anything about that. We should see some sharpening if we zoom straight. Oh god, that's a shot. If we zoom all the way. Yep, I think in the beard, if you pay attention to the highlights, we can see some sharpening, but we really don't have any control over the amount and what's happening. So usually I wouldn't recommend using this filter. Same thing goes for the filter Sharpen More. This also is very similar to the Blur More filter, which we have looked at yesterday, as in it's about 3 to 4 times stronger than the other one. We can see that clearly here. But again, we don't have any control over the detail, over where it's applied. And yeah, it's really just there for legacy reasons. If you have any actions, perhaps we should do a stream about action at some point, and they are using these filters, then they are still available. All right, so let's undo. And let's talk about some best practices for sharpening, because spoiler alert, there are some things to keep in mind. First of all, pretty much any image can benefit from sharpening. Could be that you took a photo with your camera, could be that you've scanned something in, or maybe you even have produced something entirely digital or downloaded it from Adobe stock. Almost every image can benefit from at least a bit of sharpening. And the way to usually start is by duplicating a layer and then applying some sharpening, because then we have more fine control. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So let's start with this image. Let's have a quick look. Can we perhaps increase the sharpness of this? Why, yes, we can. And in this stream, I would like to focus on 2 filters in particular, which is we have the Smart Sharpen and we have the Unsharp Mask. By the way, don't be confused by the name Unsharp. This is really a term from the old darkroom and photography days where it was called Unsharp Mask. This filter does quite the opposite. It does sharpen, it doesn't make it unsharp, just so you know. In the chat, I am a beginner for Photoshop. Can you please explain the tools, how it works? Yes, that's what we're doing today. Today we're focusing on the filters, but if you are interested in the more basic and tool-focused stream, then I would recommend checking out the creative challenges we have on Adobe Live, where we go into more details about the tools over here. That's not really what we're doing today, with the sole exception of that one, the Sharpen tool. Exciting. Shall we start with that one? I feel like this doesn't get enough love. Why don't we start with that one and just bookmark the 2 filters in, for just a moment. Okay. Here we have the Sharpen tool, which you can usually find, if it's not hidden, behind the Blur tool. And this one gets sort of a bad rap because if you apply it and yeah, it's sort of destructive and it doesn't really look good. However, I feel like there are some cool things to work around with this tool and to know, so perhaps we can actually use it in the real world. For this, I will actually create a new layer because it turns out there is a checkbox in here which says sample or layers. That means I can work on a separate layer and I don't have to destructively, mess with the pixel data and something which you couldn't undo maybe later. So I'm working on a new layer and I'm going to set the strength to around 38%. And now we can go perhaps to the eyes. Those usually benefit from sharpening, and just gonna click and drag a couple of times. I'm overdoing this, of course, so we can actually see a difference. So before and after, before and after. And if I have a look at the layer in question, we can, oh God, nightmare fuel. We can indeed see that we have only the eyes on this new layer. This is quite useful because on a new layer, we can actually change blending modes. And this becomes quite obvious if I actually go to a different image where we have a very particular issue. Just going to show that to you. This one. Pay attention to the color of those eyelashes. Are those? I guess so. Of those hairs. You can see we have some magenta, some cyan and some red in there. Let's say I were to sharpen those. We can now really see those colors. While of course now they are sharper, that's not great. But since we're working on a new layer, we can actually set the blending mode to luminosity, which now, before and after, you can see they still look sharper if I enable and disable the layer, but we have reduced the color, the saturation. So this is very nice. If we work on a new layer, and this also applies to all the other filters. For example, if you use Unsharpen Mask or if you use Smart Sharpen, you can apply them on a new layer, set the blend mode to luminosity, and recover the original color information. Another word of caution concerns the Protect Detail checkbox. This is, if I'm really gonna go all the way. I'm just gonna increase the strength to 100 so we can see what's going on. Without the checkbox, we get all those fine noise details, something which we really don't want. If I, however, let's create a new layer, hide this one. If I enable Protect Detail, then Photoshop will try its very best to protect the detail. Who would have guessed? So if we compare those two layers now, I'm just going to put them side by side. This is without Protect Detail. This is with Protect Detail. Of course, this would be way too much. Obviously, you would never sharpen it that much, but I just want to show you what the difference is. And this is actually a very good point to keep in mind. If you don't pay attention, you can unwantedly sharpen noise, because most image data has some noise in it. And we will actually see that in a moment when I'm going to show you an image which has a lot of grain in that. And usually you don't want to sharpen the grain. So it can be worth denoising an image first and then applying some sharpening. All right. Okay, so now let's actually go ahead and use some of those filters which I've been talking about for the past 14 minutes. 15 minutes now. And I suppose we could use any old image. For this one, why don't we start with this one? Let's start with the Unsharp Mask. I think this might perhaps be the most popular sharpening filter Photoshop offers. Right, so filter, sharpen, Unsharp Mask. Opening this filter reveals one of the old modal dialogues. We can't make this larger. Luckily, Photoshop does provide a preview, which means we can indeed... there we are. We can indeed have a look at the actual image and see the effect of the unsharp mask. And this is also what the manual recommends. Even though we do have a preview, it's best to actually look at the image. And before we start that, it's a good point to have a look at the percentage, at what we're viewing this image at. Because at 50%, we might not be able to judge the amount of sharpening properly. So it's a good idea to actually see this image at 100% or maybe even 200% to see the full effect of the sharpened pixels. Okay, so now back to the sharpen filter, unsharp mask. There we are. Okay, we have 3 sliders to make our adjustments. And the way this works is we have, first of all, the amount slider. I mean, that's quite obvious, how much sharpening should occur. We have a radius, and we'll see what that does in a moment, and we have a threshold. How would you get started with tweaking those sliders? Because if you just randomly set any values, you don't know what's really happening. So where do we start? Well, first of all, it's a good idea to know what unsharpen mask is actually doing. And the way unsharpen mask works is it increases the contrast along the edges of an image. So it tries to find out where do we have actual edges of information, like the arm here, or maybe the face there, and where do we have just normal surfaces that we don't want to sharpen, because I don't really want to increase the contrast, for example, here or the wall. I really only want to sharpen the edges. And this is exactly what unsharp mask is doing. And for that, we need a threshold, right? We need to tell Photoshop. So where exactly? How much should it look for edges? Should it consider, only this one here as an edge, or is also this one sort of an edge? And this is why we need the threshold slider. So the threshold tells Photoshop how different the pixels have to be before they will be sharpened. If I set this to 0, then I'm actually going to increase the amount all the way so we can see what's going on. If I increase this to 0, all pixels will be sharpened. There we go. Now we can actually clearly see everything looks sharper before and after. But if I slowly increase the threshold, then we will see, for example, here in the dress, it's no longer being, the toga, I suppose, whatever that's being called, I don't know. This one is no longer being sharpened, but the arm, for example, still is. So now we can slowly but surely remove almost all of the sharpening. But even at this high level, we can still see there's definitely something going on. For example, the teeth, right? If we zoom in all the way, you can clearly see, yep, there's something going on. Until at some point, even those get reduced to almost nothing. Okay, so how do we set this filter properly? All right, first we're going to drag the radius slider to a value where we can actually see that something is happening. Right, we can increase it all the way, but that would be way too much, obviously. Just gonna, yeah, there we go, way too much. So now, with everything cranked to the max, we're gonna slowly but surely reduce the radius until we no longer see any of this weird halo effect, right? So right around there. This would be too much. This would be nothing at all. So right around here, I reckon. Yeah. About 2 pixels, maybe. The manual says for high resolution images, a value between 1 and 2 is recommended. And Marsha is asking, why do they call it unsharp mask. Actually, there was something, if I can check. Ah, yes. The name unsharp mask comes from the darkroom technique used in traditional film-based photography. The filter sharpens the image rather than the opposite. That's what the Photoshop manual says, in case you're curious. That's all I know as well. Okay, so the radius, back to the unsharp mask, depends on the size of your image and also what's happening on the image. If you have a lot of small details like this, it's best to perhaps use a smaller radius. If you only have very big shapes and you want to sharpen like big features of a face, then you can indeed increase the radius slider. Okay, so now that we have tweaked and set our radius, we can now play with the threshold. Do we want all of the pixel data to be sharpened? I think we can clearly see that here now. Right, before, after. We have also sharpened the detail of the robe. Perhaps that's not something we want. So let's dial that back until this fabric is no longer being sharpened. I think right around here. Now if we check before, after, we can only see a bit of sharpening. But the hair definitely still sharpened, so that's good. Also, perhaps we don't want we don't want the skin to be sharpened that much, so perhaps it's a good idea to increase the threshold even further. And yeah, there we go, until the skin isn't sharpened that much. Brilliant. All right. But we can clearly see there's still some sharpening going on. Okay. Actually, I'm going to bring that down just a touch. And finally, now that we have adjusted radius and threshold, we can adjust our amount, because right now we have been working at 400%, 425. That's way too much, obviously. So let's dial that all the way down to a more reasonable level. And perhaps we can have a look at the hair for this. See, well, that's not a lot. Increase that to right around, I would suppose, here. And now that we have reduced the amount, we can even bring back some of the threshold. Yeah. And I think that's pretty good. Yeah. Checking that. Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? Now that we've reduced the amount, I think we can do more. Let's bring that back down. And there we are. Press OK. And we're done. Cool. We have now sharpened this image by using the unsharp mask filter and paying close attention not to over-sharpen those areas which we don't want. Now, you may have different preferences. Maybe you do want to sharpen the white fabric here. Maybe you do want to have more texture here down at the neck where the hair pokes out. Ew, let's not zoom in too much. So if you happen to want that, then of course you can always go back and bring those details back. Another thing which we try to avoid right now was this so-called halo effect. I can actually show that to you once again if I just bring back the unsharp mask filter by holding down Option and clicking on Filter Unsharp Mask at the top. This brings it back. And now let's actually overdo exactly what we didn't want to do just a moment ago by increasing the radius. Now we can clearly see we have this sort of halo effect going on around. If I make it bigger, yep, there we go. Now we can clearly see that. Sometimes we have to sharpen it quite a lot, like this, because otherwise maybe some details would be lost the other way. So can we perhaps reduce some of that halo effect and still keep the amount of sharpening? Yes, we can. For this, I will actually create a new instance of this layer by using Command J. You can also, if you like, use a smart object, but I would like to keep it very simple for this one. So back in here, unsharp mask. So increasing that quite a lot until we get this unwanted halo effect. There we go. Click OK. And now I'm going to go ahead and go into the blending options. And we shall actually use, again, the blend if sliders. Because, you know what? Actually, let's zoom in all the way. There we go. If I now take the sliders for the current layer, I can reduce this halo effect. You see that? Before, after. So all the highlights that would be otherwise burned out are now, if I actually soften that just a bit, fully recovered. But we still have the benefit, I think we can see that, for example here, quite nicely see that. We still have the benefit of sharpening some of the detail. Here we go. The shadows, I can also limit those if I want. Let's say I don't like the shadows that are too dark. I can also bring those back, split that by holding down the Option key. There we go. So I can sort of limit the sharpening range tonally. This is a tone range limit. And now I'm only sharpening the sort of mid-grays, which can lead to an overall more pleasing look. You can see we're still sharpening, but we don't have that many halo effects going around. And of course, if this is still too much, you can reduce the opacity perhaps. Or, and this is something we will have a look at later, use a layer mask to limit the effect only to the edges, if we have the time. And looking at the time, I don't think we will have the time. So maybe we'll have to do that tomorrow. All right. Okay. So now let's have a look at the second filter, which I wanted to talk about. Because right now we have only taken a look at the unsharp mask filter. However, there's a second one called Smart Sharpen. I had to think about that for a moment. And the cool thing about Smart Sharpen is this one does try to already have our halo removal effect in the filter already. So we don't have to go to the blending options. For this, let's have a look at a different image. I suppose we can use this one. There we go. By the way, I really do like how the stock photographer tried to reduce the reflection by using motion blur, but forgot to sort of blend that. Oh well. Anyway, let's now use the second filter, which is Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And it already says smart, so it has to be smart, right? Well, I hope so. Let's see what it does. The Smart Sharpen filter. Oh, look at that. Okay, the Smart Sharpen filter allows us to, first of all, select the sharpening algorithm, which previously we couldn't do. So let's have a look at the sliders. And actually, look at that. Looks very familiar, doesn't it? All right. So what do these sliders have to do with sharpening? First of all, we are missing the threshold slider, but that's not a huge issue. You will see in a moment. Okay, so we again have our amount slider. As just with the other filter, this controls how much of the effect is applied. If you have a higher amount, then the contrast between the edge pixels will be bigger, and this will then, of course, look like the image is more sharp. We have the radius, which is just like the other filters also, how big the surrounding pixels, the radius of surrounded pixels has to be to affect our current one. So larger radius will usually result in, there you go, a larger detail amount. I don't know how you want to call it. I think you can see the difference, right? That's a bit much. Okay. There we go. And finally, the reduced noise. And that's something which I have picked this image in particular for, because this one happens to have some grain. I think we can see that quite well here. Pay attention to the grain. So if we're good at removing the noise before actually sharpening it, then we can sharpen the image without actually just adding... Connection lost? Well, that's not good. Oh no! Hang on. Do I have a charging cable? I think the battery might have run out. Oh no. Charging cable? Charging cable? No. Okay. No keyboard shortcuts then. All right. Challenge accepted. Okay. Oh no, I think... Yeah. Oh, my trackpad ran out of battery. Do I have a mouse? I think I do. Come on. Who needs a keyboard anyway? No. No. Uh-oh. I think we might just need to take a quick break because my mouse is also not connected. Well, that's woefully unprepared, Tim. Okay. Let's just take a very quick break while I grab a charging cable. And I will be right back. Hello. Okay, I have two charging cables just in case. One is woven and the other one isn't. Right, let's see if that works. Oh god, it's just... Yep, do a stream, they said. You have fun. Let's see. All right. Cable, cable, cable. And let's see if that worked. Ah, yes, we're back. Okay. Whew. As if I didn't have enough time already. Well, anyway, right. The joy of using wireless peripherals. Okay, where were we? Welcome back. Thank you. Check charge items before going live. Thanks, Sean. You should have said that before I went live. Oh, dear. All right. Okay. So, reduce noise. I think that's what we left off. We can, using this slider, reduce the noise before sharpening our image, which is very lovely. And furthermore, we can, this is something we can have a look at a different image, we can change our algorithm. Gaussian blur, or Gaussian, as we have learned, Gaussian blur is the one that's actually used also by the unsharp mask filter. So this one is the exact same algorithm. However, Smart Sharpen has two more to pick from. The lens blur, which is great if you actually have a slightly blurry image from your camera. This then can try to reduce that effect because lens blur is different from Gaussian blur, as we have learned yesterday. And motion blur. This one aims to reduce perhaps some very slight camera shake. It won't magically recover your image from a totally shaken up image, but it will try. And we will see how good it is in the next image. Okay, for this one I will stick to Gaussian blur, and we shall... Yes, Gauss was German, I know, Sandrine. I've said that yesterday too. Carl Friedrich Gauss. Okay. Right, so now let's go ahead and actually... sharpen this image, because I think that's what we want to do. I will start by setting the amount to a very high value. I've already done that for you, so we can actually see what is happening. And then I shall increase the radius, first of all, to a value that's way too big, and then slowly back that up until we no longer or barely see this halo effect here. Right around there. I think that's pretty much, perhaps even a bit, yeah, there we go, that's perfect. You can see the halo effect is no longer there, but we're still sharpening. Amazing. Then I can back up the amount slider to a value where I'm happy with this. And I think, yep, that looks good to me. Let's check the teeth. Oh, they still do have some halo, but we can, now that we have learned, we have these sliders, we can reduce the halo effect. Tim is using Duolingo. Yeah. Okay. Right. So what are these sliders? What do they mean? Well, first of all, we have the fade amount, and if we hover over that, enter the amount of correction desired. Amazing. So essentially, it just means how much sharpening is happening in the highlights and the shadows. Set that to all the way. And slowly back that up. We cannot see anything because I haven't forgot to set the radius. Let's try that again. Highlights. Radius. Fade amount. Yes. Look at that. Slowly going away. See that? Before and after. Much better. All right. So, tonal width means this is sort of the range of tones you have in the shadows and the highlights. So if you want to decrease the tonal width, well, you can move it over to the left. And if you want to increase that, you can move it over to the right. And the manual says, and I have to read that off because I can never remember, smaller values restrict the adjustments to only the darker regions for shadow correction and only the lighter regions for highlight correction. Essentially, the same thing what we did with the blend diff, where we have dragged the sliders back and forth. That's what we're doing. Okay, so just gonna increase that. Yeah, and here until they are completely gone. Perhaps not that much. There we go, because we still want to sharpen the image. We don't want to undo all the sharpening we just did. And yeah, I think that might be a bit too much, so let's dial that back. Yes. We can clearly still see there's something happening, especially here. But we're not overdoing it. Brilliant! Amazing! Click OK. And by the way, Sean asked about Adobe Camera Raw sharpening, because there is also something happening over there. But I would postpone that perhaps to stream all about Camera Raw, because there's so much to discover. Okay, so now that we have successfully applied both the unsharp mask and the sharpen, let's have a look at one of the special features of the Smart Sharpen filter, which was, like I promised, the Reduce Shake or Motion Blur filter. And for this, we're going back to our lovely image from yesterday. And, you know, this looks very sharp, very lovely. But let's just say, oh no, someone, well, not that much, someone didn't take this photo on a tripod, and they have added some very subtle, key is subtle here, very subtle shake. You can see that here. Oh, no, hang on. Trying to simulate camera shake. Come on, Photoshop, work with me. There we go. Camera shake. You will notice I'm not applying that much camera shake because, yeah, you will see in a moment. All right. So, okay, now we have camera shake. Let's just pretend we took this image. Of course, you would never find this in Adobe Stock because all images in Adobe Stock are very sharp. Come on. Right. So we have to simulate. To know how exactly we can sharpen this back up, we should first have a look at what values the filter expects from us. Because while Photoshop is very clever, it still needs some input from us. Mainly, if we set this to motion blur, we need an angle. And while we can guess sort of the angle at which this occurred, it's much better to actually measure the angle. And for that, we can use our best friend, the ruler tool, which of course on this workspace, I'm usually using a different one. I actually have to check. I think, yeah, it might be under here, under pipette. We can use the ruler tool and measure the angle of, of the blur. So just click and drag to right around here, and we can now see, around minus 33 degrees. Good to know. All right, because now we can go back to the filter, sharpen, smart sharpen, motion blur, minus 33, and this will yield the best results, hopefully. We can already see Photoshop has been at work, and now it's again for us to decide how much of the radius. Actually, I will not fade the highlights for this, because we actually do want to see what's happening. And we can see Photoshop is now trying its very best to bring in the original image. And it's sort of doing a good job at this. We can see the windows before and after. However, don't be too excited about this filter. It can only really work with small blur values. There used to be a filter, reduced camera shake, that's what it was called. It used to be there, that can actually analyze camera shake. However, with the latest release, actually with the Photoshop release of 2022 in June, I think, this filter is no longer part of Photoshop. So we have to use this one instead. All right, so just going to quickly dial that in so we don't have any of those weird halo effects. And right around there, I reckon, we have at least reduced the camera shake just a bit, if not that much. Zooming out before and after. I doubt you can see much in the stream because we zoomed out all the way. But that's how you would fix some motion blur. Okay. Can this fix it when birds fly off as I take the shot? No. Certainly not. It looks like it's taken with a mobile phone. Yeah, I know, right? It looked like they took it out of plane window with a 30-second shutter. Oh dear. Yeah. I'm surprised Tim didn't ask me for blurry photos. Got a ton. Oh, Sean! Oh, would you look at that? All right. Okay. Now, finally, as my last trick, I would like to talk about edge masks. Because sometimes you only want to apply these smarten filters to some portions of an image, to some parts. So perhaps we can use a special mask to limit the sharpen effect to only those parts. And I suppose we could use, I don't know, this image. Doesn't really matter. Let's just quickly crop that. There we go. I need to create an edge mask. And for this to work best, I'll actually duplicate that. Go over to Filter, Stylize, Find Edges. Yeah, there we go. And then I can go over to the adjustments. Oh, actually don't need the adjustments. I can just invert the image. How about that? And we need to now get rid of this noise. For this, I will use the blur filter and, the noise. Median. To right around there. Yeah. Before and after. Good. And finally to filter other. Minimum. To increase the size of the dark edges. And there we go. Now we're beginning to have our edge mask. Looks a bit creepy, doesn't it? All right. So, finally. Oh, hang on. Oh, I don't want to crop it. No cropping. There we are. Finally, I need to adjust the tone values by using the levels. Can get rid of that. Bring this in. And we are almost there. There we go. And we're done. Okay. So now we have a sort of mask which only has high bright values where we have an edge in the image. And I believe if you don't want to do this like I just did, I believe there might also be in the filter gallery a filter. This is called glowing edges, which does a very similar thing. Like this. Actually, bring that in. And you can create a very similar effect to this, which we just did. If you don't want to use the workflow I just did. Right. And maybe even you can also try one of the other ones. The stamp filter, perhaps. I don't know. But let's stick with this one. Bring that back. Smoothness. There we go. Okay. I can see quite this similar effect. All right. Let's actually use that one. Why not? Since we have it. I will now desaturate this image by using the either Command U or Shift Command U to desaturate. And there we have our mask. Brilliant. So, as we have learned, duplicate the layer. Now we're going to sharpen this. So we could even use the sharpen more because it doesn't matter. Let's actually apply it just twice so we can actually see what's happening. Right, way too much. But now, using this, select all, Command or Control C, add a layer mask, Option click, paste, and there we are. We have now added a mask to limit the sharpening to only the edges. So, if we now check out the filter, we can see, for example, at the lips, at the edge, we can see some improvement, but whereas before the entire image is sharpened, that's no longer the case. For example, the sweater is no longer being sharpened. Very nice. And of course, you can combine this with the other halo trick where we reduce the halo effect with the blend if slider. So many things to discover. A lot of sharpening was happening today. I hope you have learned a thing or two, perhaps, about sharpening your images. Tomorrow, I will be back with the final installment of the Forgotten Filters Photoshop crash course, where we will be talking about some of my favorite ones that usually you wouldn't really use, like the custom filter, the minimum filter, the maximum filter, and many more. And as always, if you have any questions that I couldn't answer right now, do come on over to our Discord and post them there. I'm usually online. We have a Ask a Question channel. Post them in there. And I will see you again tomorrow. And of course, stick around for the next stream. As always, we will be right back.